Madam President, I rise today to talk about the House's effort last month to repeal the Federal Communications Commission's net neutrality rules. Net neutrality is the very simple idea that all content and applications on the internet should be treated the same, regardless of who owns the content or the website. This is not a radical concept, in large part because it is what you and I see and experience every time we use the internet. But the House wants to change all of that and effectively turn control of the internet over to a handful of very powerful corporations. I want to take a few moments today to tell you why I think the House's vote was a mistake, and why I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that we don't make the same mistake here in the Senate. But before I get into those details, I think it's important to take a step back and talk about the internet that we have today. Let's be clear. The internet we have today exists because it is free and open, because we have always had net neutrality throughout the entire existence of the internet. I have to give credit to my opponents on this issue, who have done a masterful job of manipulating the American public into believing that net neutrality is something that it is not. Net neutrality is not about a government takeover of the internet. It is simply the idea that all content, whether it's a web page, an email, or a movie you're downloading, can load onto your computer at home at the same speed, regardless of who owns or controls that content. This is not a radical idea. It is what you experience today when you use the internet. Right now, if you buy Rihanna's latest song from iTunes, it downloads as quickly as a song from your friend who has started a band in his or her garage. If you send an email to your mother, it arrives in her inbox just as quickly as the email she gets from President Obama. And if you start a website for your small business, your customers are able to access your website and place orders for your products just as quickly as if they are buying from a multinational corporation. I like to talk about YouTube's early days as a startup because it is such a powerful example of why net neutrality is so critical and how this simple concept helped create a billion-dollar company practically overnight. YouTube's early headquarters were situated in a tiny space above a pizzeria and Japanese restaurant in San Francisco, California. But just 6 months after the site was activated, over 100 million people were using YouTube to watch videos every day. And less than 2 years after its start, YouTube sold its business to Google for $1.6 billion. Isn't that incredible? Well, I am here to tell you that it wouldn't have been possible without net neutrality. At the same time, at that time, Google had a competing product, Google Videos, which was the standard at the time, but was widely seen as inferior. If Google had been able to pay Comcast or Verizon or any of the others large amounts of money to make its website faster than YouTube's, YouTube would still be floundering over that pizzeria, or most likely it would have ceased to exist at all. Fortunately, Google couldn't pay for priority access, and the rest is history. What I am saying here is that we take and have taken this equality that YouTube enjoyed, this basic fairness or neutrality, for granted, in large part because that's how the internet has always been. Unfortunately, Many members of the House have twisted this concept and are misleading the American public into believing that the government wants to take over the internet, and that is simply not true. One member of the House actually got up on the House floor and said that, quote, over the last 10 years, over $500 billion, billion with a B, of private investment has been made to develop broadband throughout the country. This is without any kind of taxpayer money. He's wrong on that point, but let's put that aside for now. He went on to say, continue on, this is private sector money being put into the marketplace to go and create jobs, to go and create the kinds of technologies that allow you to view and use all kinds of apps that are available on these kinds of devices. That was done without net neutrality. They would tell you that they need net neutrality in order to have this innovation. Of course, they failed to point out that net neutrality was not in place when all this innovation happened, unquote. Yes, it was. It was in place. That's the whole point. All of this innovation occurred while net neutrality was in place. We are not trying to change anything. We are keeping the internet the way it has been during this explosion in innovation. Now, my fervent hope is that this member of Congress was just horribly, egregiously misinformed. Because not only is his statement untrue, it is the opposite of true. It is 180 degrees opposite of the truth. Please, everyone understand this. I beg you. Net neutrality has been in place since the beginning of the internet. From the very beginning, during all of that explosive growth, the internet operated with an understanding that network providers must treat all content the same and must interconnect the pipes they have to customers' homes with the pipes that are owned by other operators. This was a fundamental design principle that was established by academics, engineers, and computer scientists who designed the earliest protocols for internet traffic. The fact is that the internet started and grew because everyone realized that they needed to cooperate and work together for customers to be able to have access to the content they wanted. They realized that that's what consumers needed to create demand for internet service, and they realized that that's what would lead to the most innovation on the internet. The FCC isn't trying to change that. It has no interest in derailing free enterprise. Quite the contrary. The FCC is interested in protecting the innovators and the entrepreneurs that have made the internet what it is today. Because of the internet, you no longer need a major studio to like your film or a television show that you produce in order to have people see it. You no longer need a major record deal to start distributing your music. And you no longer need a high school diploma or fancy degree to launch a small business and sell your products online. We don't want to change that. We want to preserve that. The FCC's only goal here is to make sure that the internet we know and love does not become corrupted and altered by a small number of large corporations controlling the last free and open distribution channel we have in this country. As telecom companies have grown larger and fewer and started owning not just the pipes but also the content, their incentives have changed. They're starting to care more about giving their own content a competitive advantage rather than promoting innovation and competition on the internet. The fight for net neutrality isn't about changing the internet. It's about creating a few rules of the road to keep it open and free, to keep it the same, and to continue the innovation and growth that is such a creator of jobs and wealth. The fight for net neutrality is about making sure large corporations aren't allowed to put toll booths on the information superhighway. This fight is about making sure that the internet stays just the way it is: free, open, equal, available to everyone regardless of how much they can pay to get their content on. There was a time not so long ago when net neutrality was a bipartisan issue that wasn't incredibly controversial. Just 3 years ago, Mike Huckabee was talking about the need to keep the internet a level playing field. And in 2006, 11 House Republicans voted in favor of net neutrality on the floor. Rarely do you have the Gun Owners of America and the Christian Coalition joining with MoveOn.org and the ACLU to advocate for the same policy of non-discrimination on the internet. But they all agree on net neutrality, and so do the Catholic bishops. And later today, I will receive 87,000 letters opposing the House's effort to undo the FCC's open internet rules. These letters came from Americans across the U.S., including 2,000 letters from Minnesotans who are worried about this. They want the internet to stay the way it is, open and free from corporate control. I am confident as more Americans realize what is at stake here, that we will hear from more and more constituents who will ask us to protect them from corporate takeover of the internet. What is most striking about about this issue, which seems to have gotten lost in the rhetoric that my opponents use, is that experts from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Goldman Sachs, Citibank, Wells Fargo, and Raymond James have all stated that they don't believe the FCC's current rules will hurt investment. Citibank has called the rule balanced, and Goldman Sachs said it is a framework with a lot of wiggle room, and that is a light touch by the FCC. But despite this broad and diverse coalition of businesses and interest groups, we are still here arguing about something that should have been settled long ago. Why is that? Well, a lot has changed in the last couple of years. Control of the internet has been placed in the hands of a small number of players. Media consolidation has raised the stakes for certain mega conglomerates, which have a lot more to gain in a world without net neutrality. I was last here on the Senate floor talking to you about net neutrality back in December, when the NBC-Comcast merger had not yet been approved by the FCC or the Department of Justice. At the time, I warned that this would be the first in a cascade of media consolidation deals, and wouldn't you know it, just 2 months later, AT&T announced another record-breaking $39 billion deal with T-Mobile. This merger, which Wall Street applauded, is almost assuredly going to be a raw deal for consumers. If approved, we will have a duopoly in wireless telecommunications in this country. 80% of the wireless space will be controlled by just two companies, AT&T and Verizon. Now, I look forward to the hearing next week in the Antitrust Subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee so we can further explore the details of this deal. But I think it's fair to say that I am very skeptical because it's likely to raise prices and it's certain to reduce choice for consumers. I have always been skeptical of media consolidation because at the end of the day, when corporations have tremendous amounts of power to control prices and cripple competitors to benefit their bottom line, everyone loses. But the impact of media consolidation in telecommunications is about more than just consumer prices. We have always known that large corporations have the power to influence elections. And then last year, the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United took a situation that was already terrible and made it worse, much worse. Now AT&T, Verizon, Time Warner, and Comcast can spend unlimited amounts of money to support the candidates or campaigns that they care the most about, or try to weaken or kill net neutrality. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that when a single corporation, in this case AT&T, spends $15.3 million in a single year to influence Congress and has 93 full-time lobbyists on its roster, Congress just might churn out legislation that AT&T likes. How can American consumers stuck with rising cable, internet, and cell phone bills ever be expected to counter that type of lobbying power? And with media consolidation, we have seen a shift in the net neutrality talking points of members of Congress who are also receiving large checks from Verizon, AT&T, and Comcast. Yet the irony here is that the open internet rules passed by the FCC earlier this year are actually pretty weak and riddled with loopholes. Actually, I think that is the wiggle room that Goldman Sachs was referring to. These rules are, let's be honest, a mediocre compromise drafted to appease a handful of powerful internet service providers. I wasn't happy with these rules and thought the FCC should have done more, particularly to cover wireless internet networks, but it didn't. And it didn't in part because the Commission wanted companies like AT&T to get on board with its plan, and AT&T did that more or less. AT&T didn't think the rules were ideal, but it acknowledged that the framework is a compromise that gives its investors certainty. But that hasn't changed how the House is framing its rhetoric about this rule, which is one of the reasons I think the vote last month was a political stunt designed to misinform Americans and appease a small number of very vocal critics. This isn't what most Americans, entrepreneurs, or small businesses want. They and I want a world where the future Twitters, eBays, and Amazons of the world can grow and thrive without interference from big mega conglomerates. Finally, regardless of how you feel about the FCC's rules, I think we can all agree that this issue requires thoughtful debate and discussion, not the kind of uninformed rhetoric I quoted earlier from the House debate. By forcing an up or down vote through the Congressional Review Act, House leadership short-circuited the normal legislative process and ignored the FCC's work on this issue. The FCC spent months examining this topic and meeting with tons of stakeholders and internet companies. It carefully considered and compromised on a range of issues that I frankly wish they hadn't budged on. To claim that the FCC engaged in a power grab is unfair and far, far from the truth. The White House has stated that the president will veto this resolution, but I will be working hard in the coming months to make sure that we have enough votes to stop this before it reaches the president's desk. We are at a pivotal moment. If we don't act to preserve the FCC's open internet rules, the internet as we know it today may cease to exist. I hope my colleagues will recognize this and will join with me in voting down the House's resolution of disapproval. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor noting the absence of a quorum.